to Season 1, Episode 6 of Twins Discuss. I'm Raquel, a research scientist.
And I'm Raven, a medical professional.
Today, the twins discuss
the emotional and physical processes with respect to human death.
Listener discretion is advised. This podcast contains mentions of death that may not be suitable for some. This podcast was written using information from various sources. It is presented as accurately as possible, though some of what is mentioned is simply speculation. Sources can be found on our social media pages at Twins Discuss Podcast.
So the reason that I wanted to discuss this topic was because it is something near and dear to my heart. It's something that I've spent the majority of my career training on and dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't want to discuss the history behind death. I didn't want to get into the religious aspect of it, though I do cover a bit of that in here. I wanted to go over the actual cessation, the biological process, cessation of the biological process of death, and what people on the outside experience, as well as what people who are going through it will be going through until that point of dying, which of course we don't know what happens after that, but we'll get into that part too about psychics and stuff. But anyway, because some people commune with the dead, right?
I had this discussion with my husband yesterday about how much I abhor psychics.
Oh yeah?
Oh, yeah, because I feel as though the vast majority of them, and I'm not saying that there are ones that are not real and able to commune with those in the afterlife, but the vast majority of them are swindlers. And they're preying upon those emotionally damaged people.
The hopeful.
Yep. So anyway, when we get into psychics, I'll lament.
Yeah, so, yeah. We're going to go over the background of death, but like I said, this is something that I witness a lot, and I have witnessed a lot, and I have a specific case that I went through that made me go, we need to do a podcast on that, because people discuss the history of it, death in Christianity, Catholicism, Judaism, Hinduism,
well,
but they
death
don't.
is as old as life.
Ha ha ha. Yes, but they don't go over, like the Mothman prophecies, which we actually have a segment we're doing on that.
Yeah, that's in five episodes.
Yep, and how people would, how people interpret death. But I wanted to go over the actual, like literally the emotional process of dealing with it. So that's what this is going to be about.
I look forward to it.
Death is defined as a permanent, irreversible cessation of all biological functions that sustain a living organism. Death is inevitable. It's a universal process that eventually happens to all living organisms. However, brain death is sometimes used as a legal definition of death, but biologically it is not identical. So you'll hear people say things like they're brain dead, so they're dead, but they're not biologically dead, because you'll have people who have brain injuries, but the rest of their body is fine, but they're brain dead. So legally they're dead, so we can donate their organs because they're dead. However, they haven't gone through the full biological process of death. Death is applied to the whole organism. Necrosis is death of a cell or tissue. Something not considered a living organism, like a virus, can be destroyed, but it cannot die. As of 2007, greater than 150,000 people die every day worldwide. Now, I don't know how those numbers have adjusted with COVID, and I'm not sure people really ever knew that number in the first place. So the leading causes of death are cardiovascular disease, followed by cancer, unintentional accidents, chronic lower respiratory disease, and stroke, but those change yearly.
That makes sense.
Yeah. The actual physiological process of death is simple. It's the emotional aspect that gets people, but we'll cover that as we go along. So, death occurs from a cause. Be that cause old age, cancer, an accident, whatever. The heart rate will drop, respirations will slow, thus the brain begins to lack oxygen. As the brain lacks oxygen, the body eventually becomes unconscious. The organs work less. And as they are not receiving enough oxygen, tissue perfusion drops and they become hypoxic, which means they lack oxygen. As oxygen levels drop, the body completely slows until it stops. This cessation leads to indefinite hypoxia and cellular death. Now, there are two types of death. I'm sure you remember this from school. There's clinical and biological.
Yes.
Clinical death is defined as when the heart stops pumping blood, but the brain is only hypoxic. This is also known as cardiac arrest. At this time, resuscitation of a person may be attempted.
We call this salvageable.
Salvageable. Yeah. Biological death means there is irreversible damage to the heart and brain from cellular death. So I work with both kinds of death, and it never gets easier to handle. The 5 stages of dying are also known as the grief model or the Kubler-Ross grief model. We know this as the 5 stages of grief. We went through the process of there's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. You've seen the giraffe who goes through these processes from Adult Swim?
Yes.
I show that in my classes when I teach. The best way to learn about these stages of grief and death for some people, because it's such a hard topic to discuss, is humor. Mm-hmm. And we call that humor
morbid humor?
Gallows humor.
Gallows humor.
Yes.
Gallows you got to remember, it has been, oh my gosh.
9 years? 10 years?
I left the field in 2013. So yeah, it's been 8 years.
Well, death hasn't changed.
No, and I can't imagine that it would have since then. I mean, I've dealt with death since then in many forms, but not to the degree that you deal with it every day that you work.
Yeah. The 5 stages of dying are experienced at different times. Someone can go through the process of one stage and then revert back to another.
And these are slow deaths. These aren't instant deaths.
No, these are slow deaths, yeah. I mean, I in my experience, people who are experiencing rapid death are mostly in denial. The denial entails avoidance, confusion, elation, shock, or fear. Most of them never have time to go through the other 4 phases. But the ones that are going through slow, like when they're in hospice and go through slower deaths, I've had them experience, they'll go through denial, then they'll be bargaining, and then they'll be depressed, then they'll be angry, and then they'll be back to depression, and then they'll find acceptance. Things like that. So
some just stick in denial and never leave it.
Yep, some do. And this is going to sound really...
Or their family sticks in denial and never leaves it.
The family is definitely more of a denial thing. It's interesting when I have dealt with death, how it always shocks me when family is so accepting. They're like, for whatever reason, religious reasons, they've seen them suffer. They're ready for it to end for them, whatever. When I think of denial of death, I think of people like Joan Rivers, who absolutely refused to age. And ultimately that was sadly her demise.
Due to clinical malpractice.
Yeah, vanity. Mm-hmm. Ultimately for her, and then somebody else who didn't do the right thing.
Their job right, yeah.
Yeah. There's denial, and then anger, which entails frustration, irritation, and anxiety. Bargaining, which is struggling to find meaning, reaching out to others, or telling one's story. People will go out there and they'll start talking about themselves and how far they've come in life and how they're not ready to go, but here's a story they want to teach. People at this phase will start writing books. I picked up a patient about a month ago who was dying of a form of MS. And this man he's on his third book that he's been writing since he had MS. And he's also a playwright. So
wow,
that's his way of coming to terms with it. The next stage is depression, which is the feeling of being overwhelmed, helpless, or exhibiting hostility.
I live there.
People who get depressed definitely can be very hostile. I take a lot of medication. And then, of course, there is the last one, which is acceptance, which is exploring options, having a plan in place, and moving on. I found when I read the Kubler-Ross grief model, acceptance was exploring your options. Is that someone sitting there going, okay, I'm dying, chemo, radiation, surgery? Are those exploring options?
To me, whenever I dealt with hospice patients that were in the exploring options phase, or not hospice patients, but patients that were in that exploring phase, it meant either exploring whether or not it would be worth trying to elongate my life, knowing that I had a terminal condition, or it was kind of accepting the fact that I didn't want to do those things and was going to do whatever I could to just live my best life until I could no longer.
So this is exploring the quality versus quantity conundrum.
Yep, your pros and cons of choosing one or the other. I mean, I know that choosing to go down the route of chemo, radiation, these surgical treatment options would limit the quality of life that a very ill person has versus letting the condition they have run its course, and maybe you're only sick closer towards the end versus staying sick for 3 years. You'd only be sick for a month, even though you wouldn't live but just a full year.
It was very interesting when I started writing this this episode. I actually went around and talked to people and asked people I worked with. Yeah, I talked to a lot of people, but I went around and talked to them about this podcast. I'm like, hey, I'm doing this podcast on death. What are your thoughts for whatever part of the subject that I was working on? And it was very intriguing to me, the people in my line of work, how they thought of death being, well, everybody does it. I mean, the inevitability of it was so
concrete,
almost cataclysmically so.
Mm-hmm. So well understood versus when I talk about, actually I had a lunch meeting today at my work with 3 of the people that I associate the most with in my job, and we discussed the recent events in Miami and the death surrounding this, and I was so clinically sure about certain aspects of what's going on down there, and they're in recovery now and not rescue, and why now it's taking so long to identify the bodies, because they could be in pieces and you have to do DNA, and they've started to decompose at this point. And I was just so clinical about what I was talking about. But the other 3 people that I was dealing with, they have never experienced death on the level that we have. You more than me because you've done it for longer. But they don't look at it the same way, as we have to maintain our mental stability, be clinical about how we think about it, and very calculated in how we respond to it, to get to the end goal, which is recovering all of these bodies to return them to their families so they can go through their final rituals with them, and then also find out what occurred to make them all be dead in the first place. But everybody's eyes were just like, oh, and they were like, good Lord, like, why are you talking about it? And I'm like, to me, it's so normal to talk about death, or the process of dying, or the process of being dead, the what our body goes through naturally, that I didn't even think that other people don't look at it the same way or haven't experienced it to the extent that I have.
And that's actually something that we're going to talk about. There's actually a term for it.
Ooh.
Yeah, I found out some interesting stuff.
I'm looking forward to it.
It was that's a very, it's interesting that people on, quote, the outside view death. They don't want to talk about it. It's hidden. If they don't think about it, it's the whole what is that? They out of sight, out of mind.
And it becomes, like you use the word cataclysmic, it becomes cataclysmic when it occurs because they have never, I'm a thinker. I try to think through so many situations so I don't get surprised because I hate surprises, and I often get surprised even still after thinking. But, I've thought about what would happen if you died. I've thought about, or if you became brain dead and I had to deal with things. Or I've thought about my parents and, what if something happened to Jeff or his loved ones. I've contemplated how I would respond to it because of what I used to do for a living and what I saw. And in all levels, we've seen children die and we've seen teenagers die. We've delivered dead babies. We've dealt with the elderly and the screaming families and the peaceful families and the suicides and all of those things. And when you're a caregiver, it's so hard not to be able to care for the dead because they're gone. And then you have to realize that you're not just caring for the caregiver or for the dead, you're caring for the family there, and then you're caring for your coworkers and yourself.
Yeah.
All together.
I mean, it reaches a point, where it's the patient. Then when the patient's gone, it's the family that becomes your patients. And then when all that's over, it's you, your partner, everybody else who was on that scene or in that situation. I couldn't do hospice. There's no way.
Hospice was hard, and I don't know if you saw the news yesterday about the New Mexico incident where the hot air balloon crashed and killed 5 people.
No.
I was watching the news on it, and I was thinking about the firefighters and the paramedics and the witnesses that saw it happen, and I know they're in critical incident stress debriefing still. Probably right now after seeing that, because one of the people was still alive. The hot air balloon hit a power line, and there's video of it coming down. And, it crashed in a Burlington coat factory parking lot. But, yeah, so then, all these people are around, and I'm like, okay, these people have just imminently witnessed the end of 4 lives. It would be 5, by the time that one of the survivors got to the hospital and expired. But how did they cope with this? And you could see the difference in the way that the firefighters were dealing with the scene versus the bystanders when they did the news story on them, because the bystanders were visibly shaken because they don't deal with it all the time. And the firefighters were like, I mean, I hate to say it this way, but they're like, we got 4, charred bodies because they have to do what they got to do. They got to control the scene. They've got to, figure out to maintain the crime scene to make sure that they can figure out what happened. They have to investigate it. They have to keep the public out of the way. They're putting up barriers.
Well, they're trained in it. It's their job.
They were just doing their job. Right. And it's amazing that because death is something that is so common, how little people deal with it. And that was a violent scene,
Yeah, and I feel that if people understood more of the process of it, like the physiological process of how death occurred, that they would be more apt to accept it. Even if it's instantaneous death happens the same way regardless. Your heart stops and you die.
I think people are so much more intrigued by what leads up to it. Like with this New Mexico balloon incident, it is the thought of, and I know that when they hit that power line, they were all electrocuted and they died then.
Absolutely.
There was nothing about, hitting the ground, or the falling and thinking about it.
That's secondary trauma.
Exactly. The person that was alive wasn't. They probably were brain dead. They probably weren't alive in the sense that they could be
resuscitated.
Healed. Right, resuscitated or healed. So, but it's that idea that what if because they're we're going to actually do a podcast on balloon incidents. There was one in Virginia. Yep. There's one in Virginia where they actually have audio and video of the incident occurring. And that's what intrigues people is what the people were going through in their minds in these 18 seconds or these 2 minutes that they were falling through the sky alive. And I know you're going to cover that. Right. Well, those people were alive, but you know that when they get to the ground that it's fast, but people are so concerned with that pain and suffering, and it just is that morbid curiosity. It's like when the bridge collapsed at FIU in Florida, and people were so fascinated with that death process. And I'm like, it was so fast.
Yeah, and the thing is like that process is universal.
Absolutely.
And I feel that, again, that if people understood, if they talked about it, if they didn't just hide it away, and there's a term for that, but if they just didn't hide it away, it's invisible death, then, and it's something that will actually, I think it's coming up. So,
well, invisible death is more common now than it ever was, because I know back in the day, let's just say Victorian times, because we're much more, we know more about it, but you would put the body in a wake room the day it happened, and your family would be exposed to it for days, or you'd prop the body up in the house and the parlor. Everyone would come see it, and the family, and it was we in the South still do it. You have meals around death, and you converse with people, and it's a time of gathering and such. And I don't understand why we went from a society that was okay with it and understood it to a society that shoves it under a rug.
Death is unbecoming, and death makes people sad.
Becoming.
Death
does make people sad.
Death makes people sad, and we are not a society where we want to be sad, at least in Western civilization. So prior to the 1930s, people died at home. But by the mid-20th century, half Americans died in hospitals.
Oh, my God.
At the start of the 21st century, only 20 to 25% of developing countries died outside of medical institutions.
It's so funny because you hear all the time people saying, I want to die at home.
Yeah, but people want to... So it became more and more apparent that people feared death, and they began to ignore it, not accept it, and the medical community deemed it invisible death. This is when someone dies, but interactions before and after death are limited instead of inclusive, like they had been for generations.
Wow. It's a circle. It's Lion King. It's the circle of life. You have to have death, and I don't understand. Don't get me wrong. I don't like it.
No. It's a non-witnessing attitude, and the non-witnessing attitude causes people to deny the inevitability of death. They don't face it. They don't accept it, because then they have to face their own mortality, their own morbidity. People don't want to face that because it's sad and it's scary, because it's the unknown. It is the one thing that is inevitable and unknown. People don't remember being born or being created, so that's no big deal because they're just here. They have slowly fading in memories. But death is a stop of that. And people freak out thinking about it or talking about it. And that's why we live in a society of medication and treating everything. And, death is not, there's no dignity in a lot of the deaths that happen, and I see it all the time.
Yeah.
But, like I said, if people understood the process of death, like the weeks prior to death, people eat less, they have weight loss, and they'll sleep more. Makes sense,
It does.
Days before death, people might have this sudden burst of energy and an appetite.
I remember that in our grandma when she had severe Alzheimer's for a decade before she died, and she'd stopped eating and drinking, and then she had a massive heart attack. And was in the hospital, and we went and visited her, and for the first time in like 8 years, she knew who we were.
She was lucid. It was the wildest thing, y'all.
She knew where she was. She knew what she'd gone through. She apologized for the years of issues that she'd given everyone. She was there, and she was eating and drinking, and then the next day she was dead.
So that leads up to 24 hours before death. The breathing slows and is unpredictable. People start to, consciousness becomes vague or altered. And the skin becomes paler due to lack of blood flow. And recently, my boyfriend suffered a loss in his family. And hearing him discuss it was very similar to experiences we've had, where everything was grim and pale and, oh my God, they're going to die right now. And then all of a sudden, they're okay. It's like, oh, they're going to pull through. It's totally fine. And then they don't. And it happens.
Is it like the body's way of using up the last of what it's got to try and...
It is a good question. I'm not sure, and I researched it, and nobody has an answer for it. It's like in the twins episode we had, where they don't understand how conjoined twins occur.
Right.
They know that obviously it does occur, but how? It's why, when something is a plant, for instance, when a plant is on the cusp of death, it does not have a resurgence and get perky again.
Not without some sort of external stimulation.
Exactly. It does
more
not
water,
resurge
more sun.
and then die. It will resurge and continue to grow.
Right.
So humans, I don't know, and I very rarely get to see people that 24 hours before death.
Oh, if you have, it is actually an issue in the system. Did you miss something?
Yeah, usually I get them hours before death, minutes before death, or right after death. Right. Hours before death, people sleep a lot. Mm-hmm. Thank God. Most are calm, but some can be agitated. The breathing is usually labored, irregular, or snoring. Skin is cool to touch, and they may be unconscious, unresponsive, or very altered. I think that's something people need to understand is when you are in the process of dying, whether it be it from cancer or old age or, anorexia, whatever the reason. We're taking out traumatic deaths, instantaneous deaths, we're taking all that out. You do not have your mental faculties about you.
No.
You are. I have never once in 15 years seen anybody who was in that prolonged, elongated process of dying actually be able to have a full conversation to me hours before they're dying. Like, I know that it is, about to occur minutes before you die. And I'm only speaking from experience because there wasn't actually a lot out there on what people are biologically, physiologically experiencing minutes before death. So this is what I've witnessed. People are usually 9.8 out of 10 times they are unconscious. They are
entirely unaware.
Entirely unaware. Their breathing is slow or snoring. They are usually unresponsive, and they are cool to touch. Like,
they are not reaching for the ceiling. They're not talking about lights and tunnels. They are
not. They have already, in my mind, they have weak to no radial pulses, which is the pulses on your wrist. They have, this is, I can look at these people and I know that is it. Like, this is about to happen. And there's strange little nuances that can occur. Like, they can have, all of a sudden they'll have a very elevated heart rate. They'll have an elevated pulse oximetry. And then their pulse ox will start to decline. Then their heart rate will decline. Their blood pressure is usually in the tank at that point anyway. And then it just, things that, like, we call it shock. Your body, like, you know, there's the literal word of shock, then there's the literacy word of shock. The medical term of shock is when your body is trying to recuperate, it's trying to survive, it's on the last cell of its battery. It's giving it everything it's got to keep going, but ultimately, when you reach this point of the minutes before death, everything will cease, and that's cardiac arrest. There's nothing complicated to it. You're already unconscious. You don't know you're dying. There's nothing going on up top. You just die. You go into cardiac arrest. And ultimately, y'all, everybody dies of cardiac arrest. Everybody. Your heart's got to stop sometime. When your heart stops, that's it. If we look at statistics, of the 1,000 roundabout cardiac arrests we run, in where I work a year, we resuscitate about 94 people a year of the 1,000 that we run.
Right.
So I think people need to really comprehend that number. Death is
Thanos, it's inevitable.
More likely than not, that is it when you die. There are those quote miracle cases. If you catch them at the right time, at the right point. Like my coworker and I were talking today actually about Christian Eriksen, the soccer player who went down, and how he was in cardiac arrest, straight up. And I watched it happen on TV. I was actually watching it on my computer when it happened, and I went, "Oh no, that's not. Oh no, I think he's dead. He's dead." And they get in there doing CPR on him. They shock him, I think, like twice and whatnot, and they resuscitate him. It would be very interesting to hear what he had to say about that process.
I'm sure that we will hear about it, just based on the fact that he's, a famous soccer player, and the reason that he did so well was because he had immediate care. He had a witnessed arrest, and he had immediate care, and
young,
and because
healthy.
he's a healthy, right? All the stars aligned, because I had witnessed arrests, and you have too, that no matter how healthy they are, no matter how quickly they got care, it didn't matter. It was their time.
Yeah. And speaking of time, the another name for biological aging, which is gradual deterioration of functionality, is senescence.
Ah, yes.
And it's important to note this because I read that after the age of 55, our bodies cannot repair DNA and replace our cells like before, so we gradually decline. And this happens to everybody.
They're working on that.
Yeah, there's DNA alters like CRISPR and things like that out nowadays that they're, of course, because everybody wants to find the fountain of youth. But the reality is right now, we don't have that. So
no. Well, I mean, I know we're going to get into the spiritual and religious side of things. And to many people, they already have it because they know, and you can see me quoting here, that after this, there is something else. And so holding on to that helps with the, acceptance of it, even though it can still hurt in ways. But I'm segueing because I know that you're going to get to that.
No, you're not. I mean, but you're right. I mean, people are truly aghast when somebody says they're okay with dying. As a matter of fact, people assume that these individuals are suicidal
How would you be okay with it? That's preposterous.
They're absolutely aghast. They are the individuals that want to shuttle people off to doctors and hospitals and other places and choose to ignore death versus being like, okay, this happens and it's okay.
People like us that have dealt with it, so much and seen it and have a deep understanding of it. I actually am okay with dying myself. I don't necessarily want to do it right now, but I'm not afraid to do it. And I think it's because I have been through so many things in my life that could have ended or resulted in it, that I've had a ton of time to really process it. And I know that if I got to a situation where I know that my death is imminent, I might feel differently because I don't know how I'm going to react in that particular situation. But
nobody does, nor can we talk to those individuals that have done it.
Right, because they didn't get there.
And honest to God, I don't want to talk to those people.
I know there are situations where folks have had, near-death experiences, or what is it? I don't know if you remember his name. That chef on that Nigerian fishing boat that went down, and he was caught in that air pocket in I believe it was the stern of the ship, and the divers went down to recover the bodies of everyone and to check the ship, and they found him alive. He'd been there for 11 days or something.
I vaguely recall the story.
Yeah. He was covered in gasoline and he was covered in dirty water, and he was just shocked that they were there because he was confident he was going to die. He took a total turn in his life to live it to the fullest because he was so confident of his own death in that situation, and he didn't die. And those cases are so incredibly rare, but those are the ones that make the invisible death thing more real because it's easier to ignore it when there's a chance to survive. That's why when people go missing in avalanches or in building collapses or in natural disasters like tsunamis, people hold on to the hope that they're going to show up again when we know that the reality of the situation is they are dead.
But until people get that confirmation, they want to hold on to.
They may never get.
And social media makes it even worse because people hold on to this
unrealistic dream.
Yeah, you have cancer and you don't want to do chemo, but cannabis can cure it. I mean, these ideas that science has proven that will not happen.
Right. The chemo may not work either, but you
got a damn higher chance.
Exactly. Give you a better chance than some of these other. And no doctor that is worth their salt will have a patient undergo a treatment that is absolutely 100% futile from the beginning, because that's causing harm. They will give you all of the information up front, and they will say, here are your options. This goes into your bargaining thing. Here are your options. Here's what you could choose is best for you. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but here's what I think would be the best choice. And then they can choose whether they want to go hike the Appalachian Trail for 3 months, or if they want to begin this hard, arduous, and painful process where you're going to be on Zofran and you're going to sleep all the time, and there may be a chance that you might be this and you might not.
Yeah.
I mean, we've both had patients that are, and cancer is the big thing that we go through when it comes to slow, painful, or slow, tedious death, because those happen so much more commonly, or heart disease,
heart disease, cancer, AIDS, strokes.
Yep. And we've, seen these people that they get diagnosed with stage 4F. Like, we're talking down the line. You are so far gone that it's incredible that you're still alive right now. And it's like they would say, the second I found out I had it, I started dying. And it's because they knew. I mean, because to me, the body, and you know this, it's this city that is working together, and everything. Damn it, everything has to work with everything else, and if it doesn't, you start to see failures in the entire city. The brain has to make the heart go, even though the heart has the capacity to function on its own in dire situations.
Has to be told what to do still.
Right. And if the brain is dead, the heart will still pump, because typically with brain death, you don't see brain stem death. If you see brain stem death, typically there is how the whole thing goes. It's
Yeah. Brief anatomy lesson on that point. The lower part of your brainstem controls your innate biological functions, like
your involuntary functions.
Yep, the ones that you innately cannot survive without your heartbeat, your respirations, and some of your blood pressure control.
Yep. And so, but when you talk about, brain death or severe traumatic brain injuries or strokes or whatever, we're talking about brain death that is higher brainstem function and above. Not, we're talking about the things that make you or allow you to talk, like get you out.
Allow you to be you.
Right. So people that have, the most interesting people are the ones that have, to me, not the cancer patients, they are interesting, but the people that are dying from cardiac failure, because these people know that there's something out there that can help them survive.
Yeah.
And they know that it would cause the death of somebody else to get it. They know that they would end up on anti-rejection medications to get a heart transplant. They know that they could undergo these procedures to get LVADs, which are left ventricular assist devices, and they would end up having to wear battery packs for their life, and if their heart runs out of batteries, they'll die. But they know that there are options available to keep them going, and these people have to decide whether or not they want to do that. And it's not 100% chance that you'll live, but it's more of a chance than if you have, stage 4 colorectal cancer, stuff like that.
Yeah, with LVADs, there's which is a left ventricular assist device. LVADs are, for those of you who don't know, your heart's split into 4 chambers. Your left one is the one that does like the most of the work. There's destination therapy, and then there's bridge to transplant therapy. Destination therapy means you have the LVAD placed to help you get your affairs in order for death.
Right. And
bridge to transplant is you are just surviving with an LVAD until you can get a heart transplant. There are certain people that can get destination therapy more so now than bridge to transplant. Before, there was a very limited list of people who can get an LVAD. Now now there's more people who have heart failures, because a lot of people who have these heart failures have a lot of other comorbidities that go along with that. Like they have, significant high cholesterol, they have diabetes, they've had strokes.
It's typically not just heart.
Now, they don't qualify for a heart transplant for one congenital heart defect. So they'll get destination therapy versus bridge to transplant. So, death doesn't have to be some horrific, scary, dramatized type of thing, even though there's this morbid fascination with death as being glamorized and, but it can be a dignified, peaceful, loving process.
In the deaths that I've seen, I'll be honest, I've never experienced one that felt in any way glamorous or...
No, there is nothing glamorous about the death process. However, knowing that these things are going to occur, what hospice tries to prepare people for will help in the acceptance of it, because there's nothing beautiful about death. It's ugly and it's nasty, and it's just, there's so, but it can be like when we go in to work a cardiac arrest that I know we're not going to get this person back. They are stage 4 liver cancer. It's just not going to happen. Trying to discuss that with the people who have control over whether I have to do the thing or not is a very difficult, very sensitive conversation.
Super sensitive.
Super sensitive. So, yeah. A lot of religions or faiths view death differently. Buddhists believe death occurs when the invisible consciousness leaves the body. In most theism type religions, death is described as when the soul leaves the body. Theism is the belief in a universal creator or deity, such as Christianity. And then that makes atheism the lack of belief in it. As Gnosticism, that's a long word, as Gnosticism, anyway, is the view of the existence of God or deities, but that's unknowable.
Okay.
So we won't get into the politics of religion because that's just, there's
You
a lot
believe
there.
what you want to believe, and that is what you believe in, and you're free to do that, and that's where it ends.
If it helps you in your life and to be a good person, you do
Right.
you.
As long as you're not over there doing what the Mayans did and sacrificing virgins, then
Not
carry
cool.
on.
Don't do that.
Right. That's
Yeah.
not cool.
Yeah. So faith occurs. Faith offers a sense of confidence in the unknown for new experiences such as death. No one knows what it's truly like to die, as the dead don't talk.
They might groan.
So I have seen people die, and I know they're dead. I have been there. I have gone through the processes of the done things, and these people are dead. But then they'll breathe, they'll move, their eyelids will twitch, and the first time you ever see that happen, you don't think about the biological process of, oh, this is just sodium channels firing off for the last time, whatever. No, you're like,
Gas is releasing.
exactly. You're like, no, did I do the right thing? Is this person
Did
really
I miss
dead?
something?
Yep. Did I
Right.
miss something?
Yep.
Then you reach down and make sure you don't feel a pulse, and that monitor is still flatline.
They're cold.
It is the
and
damnedest
they're
thing.
blue. I know, and they go.
Yeah,
And
people
you-
that have been dead overnight, and you get in there and their finger twitches. Unbelievable.
I know. Then they're already starting to be in rigor, or you watch as their stomach will go up, and then they'll exhale, and it typically happens after you move. Like if they're on a bed and you go to check them and you've moved the body slightly, and it's just that gas release, but it sounds like they're moaning.
Yep. Or when rigor releases and their hands move or their leg moves, or when they're finally past that phase where rigor wears off. Man, I tell you, scary stuff. So then there's the psychics,
Lord God.
but we won't really broach that topic because we know how Raquel feels about it.
I do not think at any point it is appropriate to grasp on to someone's faith and someone's mourning and their pain and profit from it in any way. And I think that the people that do that are the true sociopaths and psychopaths. I mean, you might as well kill them too, because you are just using their pain for your benefit and they're getting nothing out of it. Even if you say, I'm giving them hope, it's false. And nobody likes to be taken advantage of or to feel stupid. Stupid psychics.
And that's Raquel's soapbox. She's not wrong though. So, religion provides a structure of positivity, especially in aging, of the aging who have already lost people close to them and their support network. Finding that I was trying to determine if I needed to be secular or non-secular with my interchangeable faith and religion, but they're two separate things to me. So religion is organized, quote, faith. Faith is what I have. I don't do organized, quote, religion. I don't go somewhere and do the thing, but I have faith.
Spirituality.
Yep. Spirituality, faith. And I think that people need to recognize that death can be painful. It's definitely viewed as such. There's no lying about that. We hope it's painless, that it's an unknowing death, that you go to sleep and you don't wake up. But the reality of it is, in a lot of those cases, that's not it.
No, it's typically painful, and we live in pain constantly in one way or another anyway. It's how our body lets us know that something's not right. So considering it as signals, there are ways to mitigate that and control it, but we don't need to look at pain as being something that is in all ways negative. It is just the body's way of trying to tell the brain
We need to
something's going
survive.
on and we
Yep.
need to survive, right? And like I said, it's a city, so the brain is saying, okay. I mean, I've got pain right now in my back because I've been sitting here for 4 hours.
And
I'm
I
not
think
dying,
that,
but
yeah, and I think that people think about pain as when you're pinched, or your back
Yeah.
pain. But pain isn't always what pain is. Sometimes pain is,
different.
it's numbing. I mean, it all depends. And finding that, clinging to that sense of faith, to justify death, even that it's part of a bigger plan, it's part of a divine plan, whatever, the belief in the afterlife gives people something to cling to, that we're not done here, that I matter, my consciousness will continue on. And there are different this view of the afterlife varies from religion to religions, faith to faith, person to person, and some believe in heaven and hell, reincarnation. Some believe in total oblivion or lack of an afterlife, which, again, there's nothing wrong with any of it. If you're a good person, you do you.
if it helps you find peace.
It helps you find peace. So reincarnation is a belief or concept that a new life begins at the end of another's life, as in rebirth. As in rebirth.
Now, so you've said that, you have faith, but you don't have, like, religion.
Mm-hmm.
I am an atheist, but I firmly believe in the process of reincarnation, and it's on a scientific level. But, so, I think one thing that people get confused about is that they think that reincarnation has to involve religion. Nothing that you believe in has to involve religion. Your spirituality
Energy
is your own.
ceases from one individual or in one life form and goes to another.
Right, because energy cannot be stopped. It never disappears. It just moves. But my husband and I talk about this frequently because he's also an atheist, but he doesn't believe in reincarnation. And I really find that it is a fascinating conversation to have, because when we think about death or talk about death, I mean, especially where we're from in the South, 95% of the time you are talking with those who have faith in religion. Mm-hmm. You are typically not talking to those who are faithless. And so
very frequently.
A lot of the comfort that and I'm sure you've done this, that you give when somebody's loved one is dying, is that of prayer and hand-holding and, letting them talk about how they're going to a better place and all of these things that help them come to terms with what's going on, knowing that there is something else, as opposed to if you were to talk to somebody like my husband, who believes that when you die, you do go into oblivion, that your energy may go someplace else, not in a sentient form of any kind, that there is no soul that goes on, that our bodies
so your
are just,
consciousness ceases.
Right. And even to me, I also kind of believe that, because even though I have no idea, and I say this a lot, I have no idea what makes the words in my brain come out of my mouth the way that they do and makes me who I am. I know that you have the neurotransmitters that send signals, and I know that there's chemistry that's catalytic, and it makes things occur that keep me alive, but I can't discount the idea of souls because I have no proof one way or the other, and it makes more sense to me. Just like before dark matter was found, people just assumed it existed because everything added up that it did. So my assumption is that there probably is something that goes on to reincarnate or to move to something else. And this is why I think that when people say they have past life experiences, it's typically in children, because they're so close to the reincarnating event.
It makes sense. So with reincarnation, so you're looking at the reincarnation as the rebirth of something or someone different.
It to me, it is the energy moving from, or the energy in the soul quotation, don't know, moving from my physical corporeal form to some other living thing.
Okay.
Because the thing is, for the longest time I was against cremation because when you cremate a body, all of the energy in it gets released into the atmosphere, as opposed to if you bury a body naturally, everything, the energy in it goes back into the trees and the grass and
into the life stream.
Exactly, it goes into the life stream. It is so complicated, so complicated to have a natural burial. And it's state laws and it's environmental issues involved in it. So I've actually gotten back onto the cremation plan because even though I would be a greenhouse gas, it actually is. It's easier, it's cheaper, it's more environmentally friendly, and I am going to be buried at a veteran cemetery with my husband, so it's just easier because that's free. And burials are this is another thing that a lot of people talk about in the death process. Burials are so expensive.
And people don't talk about death and these things. Therefore, burials are even more expensive because there's can price gouge you.
Yep, there's money in death if
because y'all out there don't want to talk about it.
Yep. So when the loved one dies, what happens is, and as kind as mortuary employees are, and how they really truly do help the fam or try to keep the family, keep their dignity and their peace and all that. I hate this phrase. I hear it. I've heard it. I've seen people say it. What you should do what you think they want. What would they want? And they end up with a fucking sapphire covered coffin that's lined in silk, and they get buried in a vault. And they're embalmed, and I mean, all of these things.
It's what they want, not what it's what the dead
family
want.
It brings the family the peace, not what the dead necessarily want. Which is what I do love about our grandmother, is that she's got everything figured out and paid for and decided. So all we have to do is just do it. It's all done, And I was the same way, I've discussed my final wishes in depth, and I think that this is important that people do. If you end up in an incident where you may be on machines to keep you alive, you need to discuss with your family what your wishes are. And I mean not just your significant other. You need to discuss this with your brothers, your sisters, your aunts, your uncles, your cousins, your friends, your mom, your dad. You need to write it down.
I've done it.
Put it somewhere.
Raquel has it in her fire safe.
Yep.
I've got everything there.
You need to have it. If you don't have a living will, you need to tell everyone. You need to make it public, because the thing is, you do not want to end up like Terry Schiavo.
No, you don't.
You do not want to put your family through those years and years and years of maintaining your life because you cannot prove they cannot prove what you would have wanted. So, and then this goes back to the, the coffin decisions and all that. If I was able to have a natural burial, you knew I wanted a wicker coffin. Mm-hmm. I wanted to be buried in cotton because all of it is biodegradable and it's easily degradable. When I found out that, who's the guy that played Dylan in 90210 that died?
Luke Perry.
When Luke Perry died and they buried him in a mushroom suit, I thought that was phenomenal because, as somebody that believes in the process of reincarnation, his energy his decomposition went directly into feeding other life forms. And it was natural and well done. And I'm like, okay, that's awesome. These pods you can put your body in, then, decompose naturally. It's just the thought of it your family doesn't like to think of, because it's so graphic. And when Frodo died, my dog, when he died, we buried him because that's what I wanted to do. He got buried in a cardboard box. In the yard. And remember when I was deep in the process of grief at the time, but I was vacillating over whether we should take the duct tape off the box because I knew it couldn't decompose.
She was in a state.
I was, and we all collectively decided to leave the duct tape on the box, but because it made it easier to put it in the ground. But now, when my kids go, my other puppies, we're going to probably have them cremated simply because it is easier to deal with the remains. And a lot of families have all these things to think about. And I've thought about it now. I've gone through it, and I've Daddy had a backhoe too, so it did make it easier to dig the hole.
For Frodo, y'all. For Frodo.
Yeah. For Frodo delicious. Not for any of us. Although if we could be buried on family land, that wouldn't. But there's more state
We'd be
reason,
buried the way that we would want to be if we could. But
right.
Raquel makes a lot of really good points, and it's death is there's money in death, and look at our podcast, for instance. I mean, I'm making one on death. Not because I want to make money on it, but because there's this morbid fascination with
we
with
actually
death
we don't make money on this podcast. We pay for this podcast.
We pay for this podcast.
Yeah.
Because we like to hear ourselves talk.
I do enjoy listening to these afterwards.
I do too. I have to, but
right. Yeah. Well, yeah. You put them together
because I put them together. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
there is. People need to. They won't, but they should. They should do what you say, which is go through the process themselves. Think about it. Think about writing down what you would want and what, how you want to deal with your family, and also how you would deal with, like when our mother had her stroke or when our daddies had these severe medical issues and they both almost died. At the time, you were in a less stable position than I was mentally. Dealing with it then was hard for you, and now I know that you would deal with it the same way I did. You would have this calm affect about you because we've thought about it.
There's a lot more grace in it because I've thought about it, and I feel
we've talked to them about it.
Oh yeah, whether they want to talk about it or not, we've discussed it.
I know they don't like to talk about it. I'm like, what are your final wishes? And they're like, you already know them, and I'm like, do I know them?
Or better yet, I don't care. That one's the good one.
That's their go-to. Well, that's especially Daddy's go-to. I'm dead. It don't matter. And I'm like, you know what?
He ain't wrong. But
I actually believe. Yeah, it's like Rick Sanchez says in Rick and Morty. None of it matters in the end, anyway. So at the end of the day, as long as you are at peace with the decisions that you make, you've made the right ones.
Well, that's dealing with death is one's own personal journey.
It is.
And I, as I've said in the beginning of this, and I'll say it now, I believe that looking at the science behind it will help people have less fear about it, and understanding the physiological process of death helps people come to terms with the afterlife concept or lack thereof.
Yeah. I mean, because you don't necessarily need it. You're going to die regardless of whether you have faith or not.
It's all about how you come to terms with it, y'all.
Exactly. And communication, like you say, is the thing that we do as humans that is unique to the way we communicate is unique to us. Animals all communicate with each other, but what makes us human is our ability to connect on an emotional level with each other and to communicate our desires and wishes because we have the ability to do so. And when it comes to death, even if you're not dying or even if you are dying, communicating is so important. I know that it's the hard deaths are the ones that happen so suddenly because you don't have the ability to find out what they wanted or to communicate. And those are the hardest ones to get over, too, because you don't have the chance to start the finding peace process.
Yeah, especially, suicides, overdoses. Yep. I mean, car crashes, exactly. I mean, it's amazing, and it will never cease to amaze me what people can survive and what can kill them.
I think about this so much. How does somebody survive? Like, what's her name? Julianne. It was the girl that fell 20,000 feet out of the sky in that plane crash in 1973. How did she survive landing in the Amazon forest when everyone else died on that plane crash? And the plane broke apart.
Is it the one that was found wandering through the forest in the yellow dress or whatever?
Yeah.
The yellow floral dress.
How did she survive that? And yet, Christopher Plummer fell and hit his head on the kitchen floor and died. He was 92, but
just an example.
She was 17, 92. But how can some people get through one thing and this is part of the grieving process too, is questioning these things, like why this person, why,
and not
why
blaming
now?
Those people for surviving. It's I mean,
It's random still.
People need to think about these things. They need to think about their own mortality instead of fearing it, accept it, and YOLO in a very safe way.
It is. This is hard for me too, because as a scientist, knowing the answers is so important to who I am. But when I sit down with myself at night, I have to, and I tell myself this every night. I'm like, you have to be okay if you never know, and that is involved in so many different topics.
Yeah,
you have to be okay if you never know, and that's the way it is with death. You have to be okay if you never know, because you know this about me. I will, when I start reading books, I actually read the last page first.
Yeah, you always
because
have.
I want to know. Yeah, I want to know how it ends, to make me realize if I want to read the whole book or not. And I don't like surprises. And the thing about living and death is that I don't get to know the ending of the book. And
Eventually you will.
Okay,
Eventually we all will.
Yep. I don't know if I'm going to be the last survivor. I don't know if, I'm going to go before you go, or mama goes, or daddy goes, or my husband, or whatever. My friends, I don't know any of this stuff, and I have to be okay if I never know.
Yeah. No, and I don't. It's something that I'm one of those people where if I think about it, it puts a thought out to the universe and it's going to occur. So I have to be very careful about what I think about and how I think about these things. But I am surrounded constantly by death, and I train on death and how to avoid death. And yeah, so
that is so interesting. Okay, that's a psychological philosophy. A self-fulfilling prophecy sort of thing, where just because you think about it now, you may make it happen. Where I'm telling you, it's okay to think about these things, because I've done it so much that if it was going to happen, I've already willed it into existence.
Well, I hope that's not the case in some of these things, but
I hope not to.
Yeah, but yeah, there you go. That was death.
I enjoyed that. I think there was a lot of good information there for people.
Yep, and then, just to kind of throw it out there, the suicide hotline thing again, 1-800-273-8255. That's the suicide helpline. Just since we're talking about death, we're going to slide that up in there.
They also have a website and a chat function there, too, so you don't have to call on the phone if you want to, go online and talk to them instead.
And there's always 911.
Yep.
There's always 911.
Never be afraid to do that.
Yep. Hi, everyone. This is Raven. Due to some technical difficulties, Raquel will be unable to join us for the last part of this podcast, which is our Pearl of Wisdom segment. My favorite quote of all time is, "Courage is grace under pressure," said by Ernest Hemingway in a 1926 letter to his friend F. Scott Fitzgerald. And the reason that I chose to do this quote as a pearl of wisdom is because I have constantly related this quote to my personal experiences with death, really with any situation that could cause death, when I have to be brave. So I think about it, I'm like, courage is grace under pressure. Courage is grace under pressure. And F. Scott Fitzgerald also said a quote called, "Show me a hero and I'll write you a tragedy." So you can kind of see how they had similar thought processes. But courage is grace under pressure is something I don't think a lot of people recognize is true. If you're courageous, courage is you being graceful under pressure. So when you have to put yourself out there, when you're given bad news, when you have to hold the hand of a loved one, all because of death, there's a lot to say about how you deal with it. There's a lot to say about you and how you deal with it. How you handle that possible or imminent finality is a genuine testament to your strength and character. Now, does that make you a coward if you cower to it? No, it doesn't. It makes you human. But does it make you brave if you look at death and say, "I'm okay. I can do this"? Yes, it does. We all have an expiration date, But we don't know the numbers on that clock, which is scary. But it doesn't have to be. Just because you don't know when your last breath's going to be doesn't mean you have to live your life in fear. As climactic as we make death out to be, it's simply what happens to all of us. Life happens, then death happens. And we discussed earlier about how you don't know you're born. You don't remember your creation. You have these slowly fading in memories. And then you're afraid, a lot of people are afraid that they're going to know the end. Well, y'all, the end is coming. And you know the end is coming. And that's okay. You need to talk to people. You need to talk about it. You need to accept it as just part of your existence. Facing death with dignity and grace is courage under pressure. There's no greater pressure than standing before death and taking a breath, accepting whatever will happen and continuing to do your best. Accepting death does not mean that you have given up. It doesn't mean you've lost hope, that you're welcoming it. Death is natural. It's going to occur. It's okay to talk about it, to think about it, and to walk with it. Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. Today's episode was written by Raven Hutto. Sound editing and mixing by Raven Hutto. Our theme song was composed by Steve Brenly. Today's sources can be found at our Facebook or Instagram at Twins Discuss Podcast, or at our Twitter at Twins Discuss. The Twins will be back in 2 weeks with an all-new episode.